Okay, everybody, welcome to our first session on Messianic Jewish spiritual disciplines. So this is going to be I've set it up for 6 sessions. Hopefully we can cover all the material in that time, but I'm not sure. I hope you were all able to get some of the materials I've asked for. I know that you folks out there in Ohio may not have gotten the email soon enough for this, but I did send you an email requesting that you get the required texts, which are this book, The Spirit of the Disciplines. It should be in your email. And another book, which is a little harder to get, which is called Under the Table. There you go. Ed's got them. He's ahead of the game. These books, if you read them, will be of tremendous benefit to you in your personal spiritual lives and in your whole philosophy about being a believer, in my estimation. They come from 2 different perspectives, and yet there are enormous similarities in the kinds of things that they're talking about doing in a life of spiritual discipline. They may come at it from a slightly different angle, and that's what I kind of wanted you to see. One is from a Hasidic Jewish point of view. Hasidic, not really Hasidic. That's the philosophy of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, who is a famous rabbi and teacher. And the other one is by Dallas Willard, who I think is one of the really great minds in the Christian world, and has a lot of really good things to say about spiritual disciplines. So let's begin, right at the beginning of my introduction, where I have the course description. And I want to read some of this and then talk about it a little bit, and then we'll move on to some of the other issues. If you had the books, I hope you got a chance to read what I assigned, which was basically the first 2 chapters of spiritual disciplines, and the other and 1 chapter of Under the Table. Each week, when I send out the notes, I will also send out an assignment. The reading assignment will be right there on the notes, so that you know what to read. And don't worry if you feel like what you read, you didn't get all of it. Maybe you will and maybe you won't. Don't worry about it. We'll discuss it together, and and we'll come to some conclusions, because there are some things I don't get, and maybe in processing with you, I'll get a better understanding of what I was looking at. Some of these ideas are a bit, esoteric when you're talking about spiritual disciplines. But anyway, to begin, it says, one of the primary goals of Messianic Jewish life is to fully realize our potential as spiritual people. People conformed into the image of our Messiah Yeshua. We realize that God, through his Spirit, is shaping us into Yeshua's image. But we should also recognize that we ourselves play a vital role in realizing God's image in ourselves. To that end, we must learn to use the spiritual disciplines, in Hebrew, hanahagot, in ways which will aid God's Spirit in producing in each of us the image of God. This course will introduce the student to the spiritual disciplines necessary to mature as Jewish believers in Messiah Yeshua. Okay? So our first session today is going to be an introduction to the spiritual disciplines, like why bother? Next week we'll talk about some of those very specific disciplines, and the hope is that you will put them into some kind of normal and regular practice in your life. So you see the rest of the study, prayer, fellowship, service, leadership. And we'll talk about each of those. And those are some of the external. There are also internal spiritual disciplines, which we will also touch on, which will be helpful. I gave you a list of other devotional materials that you could think about. That's strictly up to you. It's Jewish Spiritual Practices. That book is this thick. It's huge. And if you were to go through that, I give you $1. You know, I mean, it's like it's a big deal, but it's an interesting book for the serious student, a very serious person.
Yeah.
The book on devotional classics is a book of classical writings of believers from all of history. So you have some Catholics and some Protestants and so on. This comes from a Christian point of view. Buxbaum is completely from a Jewish point of view. The devotional classics is from a Christian point of view. And of course, Perkei Avot is the sayings of the fathers, lots of wisdom that has to do with spiritual disciplines in there as well. Okay. I teach this as a course. I make you write, but we're just doing this as a study together. And if you want to do some writing for yourselves, journaling is a very good way. It's one of those spiritual disciplines that will actually assist you in developing a spiritual life that's richer than maybe the one you have now. Okay. So let's begin on page 2 of your handout. And let me just read this quote for you guys. That's there. Why? The question is, why spiritual disciplines? Why? So this quote comes from Abraham Heschel's book, Man's Quest for God, which is a study in prayer, specifically about prayer. He says that, he says, unfree men are horrified by the suggestion of accepting a daily discipline. Confusing inner control with external tyranny, they prefer caprice to self-restraint. They would rather have ideals than norms, hopes than directions, faith than forms. But the goal and the way cannot long endure in separation. The days of the week, the food that we eat, the holidays of the year, the deeds that we do. These are the frontiers of faith. Unless the outer life expresses the inner world, piety stagnates and intention decays. Now, what do you think about that quote, and what does it say to you about your life and about the life you want? Does anything jump off the page at you?
We don't want to fail.
Yeah. Okay, listen, I want you to know something. This is going to be a more thoughtful class. Okay? There's less about doctrine in this class than there is about really searching one's own person, your own soul.
I think that you have to exercise daily, every day, your forms of disciplines and spiritual things. And if you don't do that, then it tends to stagnate and decay. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I look at this, is that you have to practice and do them on a daily basis. Right. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then they can fall away from you.
That's good. Anybody else want to have any comments regarding this?
That's what I got from reading that first chapter, when he compared the young athlete,
right,
and in trying to emulate the great baseball player, and even he talked about Yeshua, and Yeshua prayed, he fasted, and he spent quiet time alone.
Yeah, those are the inner disciplines, and we'll talk about the inner disciplines because they're very important.
Yeah.
We'll also be talking. We'll be talking about the inner disciplines as they relate to the outer ones, the ones that I listed. But if you read the first chapter of this Willard book, he talks about nobody can be great just because they want to call up greatness in themselves at that moment. Why does anybody who is a believer expect to be? Look, Jared gave us a sermon today about two men, Joseph and Mordecai. Do you think that their response to the situation that they were in was something that they did spontaneously at that moment because something just stirred up inside of them?
No.
Or that Yeshua could turn the evil one away because, just on the spur of the moment, because, oh yeah, I think I'll do this. Or were those choices made long before they ever made them?
Long before.
You see, that's the whole point. For us to be able to be true disciples of Messiah Yeshua means that we walk day by day in those same kinds of things that he walked in, so that we can react the way he reacted when the time is necessary for us to react. Like he uses no baseball player is going to hit a home run just without practicing,
Right.
or make a great play, or anything like that, or a violinist is going to, you want to play the violin, pick it up and let's play a It doesn't work that way, and we all know that. We all know that in all these normal things of life, practice is what makes perfect. And if we want to be good at them, we need to do that. Why would we think? And I really want to ask you this question and have you answer it. Why would we think that we could be powerful believers of any sort based strictly on the desire at that moment, if we had such a desire at that moment, to do something? Like you were confronted, like Mordecai was confronted, or like Yeshua was confronted, because you are confronted every day with the evil one's schemes for your life. Are you making the right decision? Why do you think you should be able to? I mean, without having gone through some sort of disciplinary thing. Why would you think? Because most Christians do, most believers do. Most believers think that they got armor all over them. Right? They act like it anyway. Like the victory's already been won because they decided that they believe in Yeshua. Is the victory won because we believe in Yeshua? I mean, there may be some ultimate victory. I'm talking about the victories here and now, in this day, in this life. Right? If you had the opportunity to read Under the Table, I think he actually addresses this concern. Let me see if I can find the page. Should have noted it. Okay, he has a very sort of abstract discussion, and I'm saying I'm warning you about this book. I'm warning you about Under the Table. There's a bit of abstraction in this book, which comes from that sort of mystical Jewish point of view, and so some of his analogies and some of his discussions may be a bit, I don't know, lofty is the wrong word. It's like weird. Maybe weird is the right word, but he's trying to make a point, and let's see if we can help. We can understand the point ourselves. On page 6 of this book, he goes into this whole discussion about how God created, in the beginning, God created the world, and the Torah is teaching us that this world is not independent and self-existing, but it exists within God, really, basically. And he goes through all of these gematria kinds of things in which the letters of the word Breshit are rearranged in an effort to teach us a lesson about God being all in all. That's basically what he's saying. That everything is in God, okay? But that the world that we live in, while it is in God, is in this world. So when we think about our lives, let us not be thinking solely of the world to come, solely of the fact that we have a secured place in heaven or whatever you think post-mortem bliss is supposed to be like. This is not about that. It is about this world, because that's where we are. And our test, the test of who we are, is in this world. Again, I'll use Mordecai example. His test was in this world. Had he not done what he had done, people in this world would have died. Not in some esoteric afterlife. The effect wouldn't have been there. The effect was here. As the scripture tells us, as our prayer book tells us, I should say. The principle for what we do, our mitzvot, is intact for us in the world to come, but the interest benefits us now. In other words, that when we do these things, when we live according to the disciplines, the effect is immediate on the life that we have now and secures for us, in a sense, our place in the world to come. So it's a necessary thing, not this notion. And again, I would argue that Willard goes into in some depth, actually, in his discussion, that people just don't bother with this because, hey, we're saved. We're saved, and what do we need to do? And so maybe, we'll do the right thing. Maybe we won't, but, we got, God's a cool dude. But no, what we are expected to do is to realize the fullness of who and what we are in Messiah Yeshua. And that's something that only we can do. It doesn't happen on the automatic. It's required of us to do things. So I give you this little saying, which also comes from under the table. It says, if you're on your page there, it says, on the day of reckoning, said the famous Hasid Reb Zusha, when they ask me, why weren't you like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? I won't be afraid. But when they ask me, why weren't you like Zusha? Then I will be afraid. We all get that? You all understand what is being said there? That each one of us has our own potential. Not all of us are going to be able to walk on water. But you're not required to sacrifice your son or to do some of the things that Abraham or Isaac or Jacob had to do. And certainly not Yeshua. But you are expected to do what you are supposed to do. That will be required of you. So each one of us has to know what that is and be able to reach that potential. So that when you're alone in that room with Messiah Yeshua at the end of the age, you can say to him, Messiah, I did everything I could. The rest of it is up to you. The rest is on your mercy. But we have to be able to say, I want to be able to say that. I did everything I could.
What is it that Paul says, well done?
Yeah, well, Messiah teaches us about well done, good and faithful servant.
Good and faithful servant.
Yeah, because it's the story of the talents, right? One is given 1 talent, another 5, another 10. And the guy with the 2 guys with the 5 and 10, they double the money and they give their master double what he gave them. The one with only 1, he left it in the ground and he gave it back to the master at the end. And he came back and says, I knew you were a tough guy, so I didn't want to lose your money, so here's your $1 back. And he says, get away from me. The least you could have done was put it in the bank and get me some interest. Didn't even do that. Go away from me. And he gave his money to the guy who had 10 because he was a wise servant. It's the similar thing. It's what are we doing with with the talent that God has given to us, our abilities? What are we doing with them for the sake of God's kingdom and for our own sake, for the sake of the quality of our own lives? This is the whole point. It's not just about what we're doing for God, it's about what we're doing for ourselves. Okay. So this quote from Romans chapter 7, famous if you've read the book of Romans any number of times. Paul is here describing, he's not describing himself, by the way, for any of those of you who care about this sort of thing. He's not describing himself necessarily. He's describing the human condition, generally speaking. And he says, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of flesh, sold into bondage to sin. For what I am doing, I don't understand, for I am not practicing what I would like to do, but I'm doing the very thing I hate. But if I do the very thing I do not want to do, I agree with the law, confessing that the law is good. So now, no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh, for the willing is present in me, but the doing of the good is not. For the good I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. Now you'd say, this is a very confused person, right? But what he's describing is the internal struggle that goes on with all of us when we're doing that which may or may not come so naturally. Thus, the need for spiritual discipline. To train ourselves. Listen, I know how to play the guitar. But let me tell you this. You're learning how to do different things with your two hands, it's funky. And learning how to put your fingers on the right strings at the right time is also, it's not that, it's unnatural. Or if you learned how to try to learn how to play the piano, making your left hand do something completely different than your right hand is doing, it is really hard, right? Or there are any number of things that are just, like playing a sport. You have to hold your hands and I can't play golf for the life of me. It's terrible. And I can't make that thing do what I want to do no matter what. I can't hold my hands in the position that they want you to hold or swing like they want because it's so uncomfortable. It's the same thing in a sense with our spiritual lives. We want to do, up here in our head, we know what is right. We can all look at the Torah and the Bible and see the examples of Yeshua and say to ourselves, gee, look at him. He could do all those, and or read the Torah and it says, love your neighbor and, turn the other cheek and all these other, wonderful things. But we know that in our head, but it doesn't translate into the way in which we live our lives. Somebody says something evil against us, we don't say good in return. No, we're immediately looking at how we can strike back. Or we take the selfish route in any transaction, or any other number of things that we know are wrong, but we do them because we're struggling, even though we know what is right. Listen, even again in our prayer book, in the Jewish prayer book, the wisdom in the prayer book is great because it talks about, Lord, I need you to forgive me, even though I sinned intentionally. Because it knows we sin intentionally. And so, how do we overcome this problem? Now, Paul talks about a solution to the problem later on in the letter of Romans, in which he talks about another law, the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua. But that law is not an instantaneously transforming event. It's an epiphanic event, one in which we come to the realization that the power does lie within us. What we need to do is to exercise that power. And that's what this class is hopefully going to be about the doing of things which will result in the changes that we want to see in the way in which we react to things. Right? If you want to be a runner, who here can run a marathon tomorrow?
Train and practice.
What would it take to run a marathon, in a year? Probably running 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, 3 or 4 or 5 miles every single day, getting yourself trained for such a thing, right? That's what it would take. And in the same way, to be spiritually more, have a greater spiritual acuity will require disciplines on your part to make you more than you are. So wherever you are, whether you're, a very baby believer, or whether you're much further along down the line, we all still need these things. Because we all have to be able to say, when they say, "Will you like Zusha? Will you like Rob? Will you like Tony? Will you like Marsha?" You got to be able to say, "Yeah, I was like me." Right?
So inner control should not lead to external tyranny.
Well, let's think. Well, now that you brought that point up, he says that unfree men. This is going back to Heschel's quote at the beginning. Unfree men are horrified by the suggestion of a daily discipline.
Because
Only people who feel that that's slavery.
Right.
Okay? They're confusing inner control with my willingness to have self-restraint, to have self-mastery over something, because I deny myself, is not tyranny, or should not be tyranny. It's part of the discipline. I have a bet with my doctor right now. I got to lose 20 pounds. I guess his losing 15. He's a little slimmer than I. I got to win the bet. So I am doing things like I'm eating like 1,500 calories a day, and I want to be eating, 6,000. In an effort, so my next checkup, I walk in there. That's what I'm gonna tell him.
Because I'm gonna restring his tennis racket and get him out there.
That would also be good. But the point is, I'm not considering it tyranny that I'm not eating bread and I'm not eating certain things, because it'll help me lose weight or whatever. You do what we do because we want to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying, they prefer caprice to self-restraint. That's what unfree men do. Yeshua says, Paul was the one who said, I am free. I am free, but I make myself a slave to all men. And it's not a tyranny for him, because it's his choice. He chooses the good. And yet, look, this idea of having ideals rather than norms. We can always give psychological assent to greatness. We look at Yeshua and we admire his spirituality. Or we look at some of the other great saints of the scripture and we admire them and wish upon a star like we could be like them, because we admire their nobility. And yet it always remains an idea. It never realized in one's own person. Why? There's no reason for that, other than our own unwillingness to do what they did. So if we can make ourselves understand that this is necessary, then we can have the hope of achieving that aspiration. That's what we want. Okay. Okay, so as believers, we hope to live up to our highest ideals, but we soon discover that there are things which hold us back. We need first to recognize what those things are, and then find those tried and true ways that help us to overcome those obstacles and realize our aspirations. So you got to know what the problem is if you want to solve the problem, right? So understanding that there are things in our own nature that want to hold us back will help us to build our strength in those areas that we might be weak in. And that's what we're going to hopefully do. So now the idea is recognizing the real world. This gets us back to our friend from Greenbaum. So before we can really we can begin real change, we must begin to recognize where we truly are and who we are. No change is possible where no need of change is recognized. And to do this, we have to recognize the world around us for what it is and how it affects us, especially its negative effects relative to pursuing spiritual maturity. So what might be some of the characteristics of the world around us that so affect us? Characteristics, for instance, that make up our personal turkey worlds. You remember what we said about the turkey, the turkey prince. He lives under the table in this world of his own creation. So what's our turkey world made up of? What's your turkey world look like? What are the things that are holding you back? Yeah, well, that's true. American human culture, for that matter, is one of those constraints on our abilities, particularly the culture we live in. I mean, we are living in a distracted culture. It's really hard to focus. How many of you have trouble focusing for more than 15 minutes at a time? I think it's something in the drinking water. I'm not sure.
Cell phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Cell phones, all the the TV, the 24-hour news cycle, which makes us crazy. It never stops. We always have something, particularly these last few years. I mean, there's been nothing. Every day is a new circus.
A new alert.
Something crazy. Who knows? We live in a very distracted world. We also live in a world in which the values that are most important to the community, to the society at large, are not God's values. They run contrary to the values of God. The notion of solitude, quiet, thoughtfulness, of just
Discipline.
not being ambitious all the time, or straining for new things. We live in a culture of more. You know what I mean? More is the great value. More, I got to have more, and we're always striving for it, and it cuts into our ability to just be.
That's too much stuff. Be responsible.
It's more important to have more data on your cell phone and your computer than have spiritual.
Yeah.
To have the.
Think about all the things that clutter your life
Sorry.
now. Right? I mean, I always thought, one of the things I've noticed in the last 20 years of my life is how very little time people think they have.
Amen. Yes.
Really?
I mean, everybody is busy.
Yeah.
And I always wonder what they're busy with.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a human being like me, I'm not always busy. There are moments, of course, but I'm not always too busy to take a phone. Like, one of the things I hate, I call you and you don't answer. That really ticks me off. If I call you, answer me.
Yeah.
Unless you have a reason for avoiding me. I mean, that's how I take every unanswered phone call. I take every unanswered phone call as, I really don't want to talk to you. Now, maybe I take it personally, but that's how I feel.
Not everybody has caller ID.
Or we could be driving, but then
Well,
you gotta put SOS at the end of your message.
Get a car phone. I have one. No. It's one of my pet peeves. I'm just because, and then people don't get back to you for like days.
Sometimes I just
And it's
can't
like,
find my phone.
How busy can you be? I mean, it's one of those things that I find is part of the culture. I'm maybe overplaying my feelings here a little bit, but I just feel it's embedded in our culture to be able to do that. I don't want to talk about us, because everybody does have caller ID pretty much.
I don't have caller ID, so if you're not programmed in my phone, I don't answer it. That's the way it goes.
You see, and 20 or 30 years ago, nobody would do that. Everybody would just answer their phone, and they would find out who was on the other end of the line, and then if they had something to do with them, they would do it. And if they did it, and it was it. Now we find, I think, for some, that's just one thing. But this whole general idea of busyness.
Yeah.
So I really want you to think about how busy you are. Because if you're going to have a life that has spiritual disciplines involved in it, you're going to need a little bit of time. You're going to have to take time in order to do the things that are necessary. And if you don't have the time, it's like the excuse I make for not going to the gym. That's the thing when I don't have time. I don't have time to drive over to the gym and change and But it's all it means is I really don't want to do the exercise. I don't want to do that exercise. Why don't I just say it and just give up my membership? Be truthful. You see, I don't want to. I don't want to get the benefits, the aerobic benefits of riding the bike for an hour or whatever. I don't want to do it. That's why. That's the reality.
So take a walk.
It's not. You understand? If that's the reality, I don't want to do that. And it's the same thing with spiritual life. You either want to do these things or you don't. And that's the thing that we have to. That's what I'm talking about. The real world. Understand what our real world looks like. And making a decision that, okay, I do want to be better. And in order for me to get better, I'm going to need to set aside the time to do the things that are necessary to achieve my goals. If that means spending an hour in prayer every day, that's what I need to find the time for that. If it means studying scripture, I need to find the time for that. And so on, and so on, and so on. All right? I always tell the story about the Messiah Yeshua. It's found, if you want to look it up, it's found in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Okay? Let's see how we're doing. We got started a little early, so that's good. So if I go to the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark, I don't know if you'll be able to read it big enough up there. But one of the interesting things about the Gospel of Mark is it really doesn't beat around the bush with stuff. It just gets into the stories. Like there's no birth narrative about Yeshua. We are, basically, we're introduced to John the Baptizer. Yeshua shows up and he gets baptized, and then he goes off on his ministry. Okay, so let's pick this story up here. It says that this is after he was baptized. It says, and so Yeshua, right after he gets baptized, according to the Gospel of Mark, it says, and he was going along by the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Yeshua said, "Follow me. I'll make you fishers of men." It says immediately they left their nets, they followed. Boom, everybody's going. I got no time, man. We're going now. So boom, off he goes. Right? And then it says, in verse 21, it says, they went to Capernaum, and immediately, there's that word of man, immediately, straight away, on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and he began to teach. He didn't waste any time. He's right off. He's busy, man. And they were amazed at his teaching. He's teaching them all, like one having authority and all this stuff. And he starts healing people, casting out demons, doing all this stuff, right? So I want to jump down. So just setting the scene. He's in the town of Capernaum, and he is doing all this stuff, right? It says immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew and James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick, so he says immediately, and they spoke to Yeshua about her. He came and he raised her up, and so he heals her. And then it says, when evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing to him all who were ill and those who were demon-possessed. The whole city gathered at the door. The whole town. Listen, Capernaum's not New York City, but imagine 100 people, gathering at the door, or 1,000 people. Who knows what it was? A huge crowd is, all going after him. It says, and he healed many who were ill with various diseases, cast out demons, and he was not permitting the demons to speak because they knew who he was. He's got a crowd. And then it says in verse 35, it says, early in the morning while it was still dark, Yeshua got up, left the house, and he went away to a secluded place, and was praying there. So he got up, he knew he had to commiserate with the Father. He had a busy day. Now he should have, me, I would have wanted to be sleeping. But he decided he was going to get up early and he was going to go and talk to the Father. Right? And listen to this. Listen to what happened. So it says, Simon, I guess he got up a little later, and it says Simon's companions were searched for him. And they found him, and they said, everybody's looking for you. He said, you know what? Let's go somewhere else. He did not feel the need to continue to keep himself busy. He had somewhere else to be. So let's just leave. Now, wait a minute. There were hundreds of people there waiting for him. Many of them might have needed healing. Why didn't he heal them? Why?
Because he was talking to Father, and Father must have guided him to go someplace else. That's what I think.
Presumably, he got a message
he was in
from
prayer.
the Father. He says, listen, I got other things to do. I'm leaving. Why do we feel so busy? Because, everybody's clamoring for our attention. And we have no time for that. But he had. He made the time. In the same way, we have to make the time. We have to make the time to be with God, and the time to realize that we don't have to do everything. That all of this busyness that we have, maybe it's artificial. Maybe it keeps us from thinking about the things we should be thinking about. Maybe it's that white noise that just goes on and on and on and on to keep us away from the painful thoughts that we have day after day, of dealing with our own weakness, of dealing with our own miseries.
And if we spent time with God, he would help us with those.
Well, precisely.
So you have to spend the time with him in order for that to happen.
That's how you transform, how you heal.
That's it.
Sometimes
How you deal.
it's just making that decision to be with him, and you don't even have to say anything. Just sit and hear with you, just me and you. Sometimes we feel inadequate because we feel like we don't know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of times we don't have to say anything. Just be.
Exactly. That's right. So, all right. So let's continue here. And I know I put some scriptures in here for you about the potential of human life. Because remember that what we're driving for is to fully realize the image of God in ourselves. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And so how do we realize the fullness of that, of all that God is in ourselves? Because that's the goal. And that is the goal which we're pressing forward to, according to God's plan. Listen, in the garden we were something, God is bringing us to something else. In the resurrection, you will not be precisely what you are now. You'll be something more. But between now and then, we contribute to that final form. Okay? I think part of the problem in the believing life is that people are given sort of Willard discusses it about the whole idea, sort of this cheap grace that he uses the term. And in which we take certain things for granted He says this on page 20 of his book, Spiritual Disciplines. He says, true character transformation begins, we are taught to believe in the pure grace of God and is continually assisted by it. Very well. But action is also indispensable in making the Christian truly a different kind of person. One having a new life, in which, as 2 Corinthians says, old things are passed away and behold, all things become new. Failure to act in certain definite ways will guarantee that this transformation does not come to pass. In other words, it begins with the grace of God, but does not end there. See, but we're taught these things because we got scriptures like Philippians, where it says, he who has begun a good work and you will complete it. So, okay, I consider my tickets and let God fix this broken thing I have.
Wonderful promise.
It's a wonderful promise, but you know what? We have to assist in the promise.
Yes.
You see,
That's right.
this is the whole idea of, when we get to it, the whole idea of the mitzvot. That the mitzvot do things which translate, well, how does he put it, our ideals into norms. That's what the mitzvot help us to do. I'll give you an example of what I mean. When we say the Ve'ahavta, we say, and you shall bind these things on your arm and on your forehead. Bind these things. So now that's a lofty idea, to take God's commandments and to bind them, some, aesthetic kind of, esoteric kind of a way. What do Jewish people do? They put tefillin on.
But it's not about it.
I'm sorry?
The whole idea is not about the feeling. It's the practice the word of God.
Yeah.
Thinking about the word of God and do.
Yes, that's the ideal. You see, but the norm, this is the idea of translating an ideal into a norm. I don't know if you tied tefillin, but it's a glorious thing. Particularly if you're doing an minyan with a bunch of other guys and women do it these days too. To sit there and wrap these things on you, and before you begin the common prayer, it's a holy thing.
Help us Gentiles to understand what you're doing.
What am I doing?
Yeah, when you said you're wrapping.
You say a prayer and you take these leather straps and you wrap them in a particular way around your arm. And you put them on and you wrap these other leather straps on your head. I'll bring that tefillin in next time.
Okay.
So you can see it. And you put them on. It's like putting on the armor of God. It says to put on. See, here's what the Jewish people would have done with Paul's prayer. They would have had a whole suit, which Jews do. If I open for you the morning prayer book, that's the first thing you're doing. You get up, you wash your hands, you put your tefillin on, and then you go to the prayer. Then you go to the minyan and you wrap the leather straps and you put the tallis on. And I mean, you're dressing up to pray. It's like putting on the armor of God. It's an actual thing. It takes the ideal and makes a norm out of it, because that norm then becomes the way you act. And it's the same thing with all of our ideals, the things that we consider to be important ethically for Messiah, to be like Messiah Yeshua. We should be translating all of those things into actual deeds that become the way we are, because after so much practice, think about it, why do we practice tennis all our lives for? So that we can make the shot without thinking about it. I don't want to have to think about, I have to pull my arm back, I got to bend my knees over here, I got to do that. You can't do that in the middle of a match. You got to be able to swing and have it work. I mean, if a baseball player who's getting a ball thrown at him at 95 miles an hour has to think about it, he's in a world of trouble.
Even,
So you practice
even
and
Federer
practice
didn't
and
wake up
practice.
and he was a great player, right?
That's 10 million balls hit. That's what that comes from. It's the same thing with us. If we take our ideals and make norms out of them and do those norms day by day by day, they become who we are and what we are. And it's the only way we can really and truly be vigorous, victorious. Otherwise, it's just, a a shot in the dark. Whether we're going to, in that moment of crisis in our believing, like somebody comes up to you. We don't face this in America because, after all, we live in a free and pluralistic country. Nobody comes and knocks on your door, no, at least not yet, and tells you what you can think. Okay?
Not yet.
But if you were, a Jewish person during the Holocaust, but maybe they didn't know you were Jewish, what would you do? Would you hide? Would you be able to say, or we think about the martyrs of the faith in the early days, they could just as easily have denied it and said, no, it's not me. But they admitted to it, and they were, dragged off the Colosseum or something. What would you say at that moment? Would you deny God? Would you be like Peter? Peter had the choice. I don't know him. I don't know the guy. Even this is after he declared that he'd go to his own death with the Lord, right? Praying. So, in the moment, we can't expect that we're going to be groovy in the moment of crisis if we haven't been practicing all along. So, Messiah tells us that he says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls in the ground and dies, it remains only a single. But if it dies, it produces much seed. We have to see the potential that we have in our own lives. Sometimes I think we look in the mirror and we think, what am I worth? And yet God says you're worth a whole lot. And what we need to do is to see our worth in terms of God's values rather than our own. And whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and lose or forfeit his very self? I ask myself this question every time I watch the news. Gain the whole world and lose oneself. And, so what are we going to consider our values? This is, again, this idea of understanding your real world and where your values lie. What's important to you? Are you going to be willing to rearrange your value system? Maybe most of you have your values in the right spot, but only you can say. And decide that these things are important for you, important enough for you to change your life. All right. Finally, he says, dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So this is our goal. This is the goal for us to be like Messiah Yeshua. Now, all these marvelous things are ours, yet something is missing. What is missing? Well, read the rest of it. Right? The world is broken, the loss of God's presence and his guidance in the world in which we live. What is missing? What is it that's missing from our deformed condition from a biblical perspective? There can be no doubt. This is from Willard. Page 65 of Willard. I don't know if I got you that far. No. What is it that is missing in our deformed condition from a biblical perspective? There can be no doubt that it is the appropriate relation to the kingdom of God that is the missing nutrient in the human system. Without it, our life is left mutilated, stunted, weakened, and deformed in various stages of disintegration and corruption. This is Willard. This is Mr. Willard talk. You know, he really feels that there's a problem in the life of the believing of the household of God. He thinks this thing because he says, in a world where the church, where believers were who they were supposed to be, the world would be a completely different place. Completely different place than it is. And he believes that the real problem lies in the fact that there has been very little in the way of disciplinary training. You know, this idea of really and truly understanding the disciplines. I want to, if I can get this up here, I'm going to try to read this for you. I put it in, it's over here. Now, this is an article written by the elders of Willow Creek Church. Now, how many of you know what Willow Creek Church is?
I've heard of it.
Willow Creek Church is one of the largest churches in the United States. They have about 30,000 members of the church. It's in Minnesota, I think, something, or Chicago, or a suburb of Chicago, or something like that. So, I want to, without reading the whole thing, which you know, do that. So here, Willow Creek had all these people. Now, you know, in the early days, Willow Creek was one of those seeker-friendly communities. They got lots and lots and lots of people, 30,000 people. That's like a city, man. You know, 30,000. But they realized something about what they did. And so it says they released the results of a multi-year study that they did on the effectiveness of their programs in philosophy and ministry. The study's findings are in a new book entitled such and such. It says the reports reveal that most of what they have been doing for these many years and what they have taught millions of others to do is not producing solid disciples of Messiah Yeshua. Numbers, yes, but not disciples. And it gets worse. So some of the stuff that Hybels is the pastor. Some of the stuff that we have put millions of dollars into thinking it would really help our people grow and develop spiritually. And the data actually came back, it wasn't helping people that much. Other things that we did, that we didn't put that much money into and didn't put much staff against, is stuff our people are crying out for. And he goes, you know, they did the seeker-sensitive model. You know. And he says, we made a mistake. What we should have done when people crossed the line of faith and became Christians, we should have started telling people and teaching people that they have to take responsibility to become self-feeders. We should have taught people how to read their Bible between services, how to do the spiritual practices much more aggressively on their own. Now, for them to admit it is a marvelous thing, because presumably they made changes to their programs so that they can help their people more. But we're talking about one of the biggest churches in the country. I'll bet you their membership dropped by 20% too, or more. Because the minute you start demanding things of people, discipline, that kind of thing, then it gets hard. Then people say, because why? Because they prefer ideals, not norms. Because they prefer hopes rather than direction. You know what? That's not what I came here for. I want you to make me feel good. I want to feel good. I feel lousy. I want you to make me feel good. Okay, this is like when I go to my doctor and I tell him, Doc, I want you, your job is to make me feel good. And I complain about this ache and that, and he says, dummy, like I'll confess something to you. I had all of these symptoms, and I thought, oh God, my heart must be going or something like that. So I go and I start complaining to him, and I have a whole list. I brought a list of symptoms with me because I'm going to tell him about every one of these things. So he goes and checks me out. We go and we do all these tests, and he comes back to me and says, "These are all bullcrap. It's all this. There is nothing to any of these things. Lose some weight." That's what we need to do.
That's always their answer.
No. Well, it may be so. It may be so. I feel better. I've lost a little weight, so now I feel a little bit better. But I can tell you this: it's the same thing with the disciplines. He's telling me I need to lose weight and exercise, which would definitely be more than he could do with his drugs. And he knows that. And frankly, I know it too up here. But I want the easy way because I don't want any norms. I want to have to change my norms. I like being a fat, lazy bum.
Treat my symptoms so I can stop my gym membership.
And it's the same thing here. We can treat the symptom. I come to the synagogue because I want to hear a happy message about, that'll make me feel better. I want to sing and dance with my friends and eat a good lunch, and I'm fine. And instead of making the fundamental changes that would make me a happier person, generally speaking, that would make me stronger. So he says, what we need an appropriate relationship to the kingdom of God. This is why I like this guy, because he is a kingdom of God guy. And he speaks in appropriate language about the things that need to be done. Okay, so how do we regain these things for ourselves? Here we go. Let's begin. The secret involves living as he lived in the entirety of his life. We're talking about Yeshua. In the entirety of his life, adopting his overall lifestyle, following in his steps. So he says following in his steps cannot be equated with behaving as he did when he was on the spot. To live as Messiah lived is to live as he did all of his life. Because all of his life led up to his being able to do what he did when he was on the spot. Right. Why in the Garden of Gethsemane, even though he wanted the cup to pass from him, he wouldn't do it. He had the courage to forge through because his father had trained him from creation. Right? Now, most of us would have ran, confronted with that problem. Most human beings would run, But what are we going to do? Okay. So, let's, we discussed the part about Willard and the baseball guy. I want to conclude our study today with a quick breakdown of 4 things well, 3 things that are the fundamentals of the discipline, which come from Acts chapter 2, the first sermon of Peter. So let's take a look at that. And this is an overview, and we're going to get into each one of these over the next few weeks in detail, because I'm going to give you practical ways for you to actually do all of these things. That's what this course is about me giving you some help in actually doing some of the things that you can do, which will then result. I'm going to be your personal trainer. That's the objective here, right? Not that I'm a superstar of any kind. Okay, some of the questions I want us to think about are who we think we are. I'm going to just go over these really quickly. But what does it mean being a man of God look like, or a woman of God? What does that look like? Understanding what the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, these ideas of two forces within us. Like remember that scripture I read from Paul about the inner struggle. Okay, Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Hara told means the good inclination and the evil inclination. That's what they mean. So everybody has both an evil inclination and a good inclination. Everybody knows that. You know, if I meet a person who has only good inclination, you know, then maybe they need sainthood or something. I don't know. But most of us, you know, we deal with this. And then what is the role of Torah in our life, the role of the Holy Spirit in our spiritual life, the concept of teshuvah, doing teshuvah, which is something we're going to discuss. This is a Jewish way of looking at the idea of spirituality, of teshuvah. You'll get other Jewish terms as we go along. And I'm always concerned that we understand our specific calling as Messianic Jewish believers in this regard. So we'll touch on that later on. But the story of, but in the second chapter of the book of Acts, Peter teaches us something about the kingdom. And that's what I wanted, because, you know, Willard said, what we really need is a new association with the kingdom of God, right? I want you to take a look at verses 2:42 through 47
In Acts.
in Acts 2. Acts 2:42 and 40 through 47. Okay? So here he says, and they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayer. So right there, we see what the nature of the community that first came to be the church was to look like. And it wasn't really very dissimilar to the Jewish world, because after all, they were all Jews and they were all doing, one way or another, doing these things, right? So the first is the apostles' teaching. So the first is this idea of study as a discipline. I have a saying about that, which we'll get into in depth when we get to this next week, when we talk about Torah study. The study of Torah alone leads to agnosticism. That's why there are so many agnostics up on Prospect Avenue at the top of the hill, at the Divinity School up there. Because without devotion, without worship, all study can ever do is give you facts. Facts alone do not make a spiritual life. This is not to denigrate facts. Facts are important, very important. But truth must be mixed with devotion, because there are some truths which are not discernible except through a devotional life. So if you sit around, I'm telling you right now, and you studied all the, the great books and did not worship, you would become an agnostic. You definitely would. At least an agnostic, if not an unbeliever outright. Just telling you. There are a lot of puzzling things in the Bible. Very puzzling things. That if all you're doing is looking at the facts, really screw you up. I'm just telling you. We'll get into this more deeply next week when we do study. Because study in Judaism is the highest religious act, not prayer. To know the mind of God is greater than prayer. Know the mind of God. Seek the mind of God is the better word.
You said study is the highest.
Yeah. That's why it's first. That's why I said, that's why they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, by the way. Okay? And then it says, and to fellowship and breaking of bread. right? So here it says, I believe this. 85% of life is showing up, like Woody Allen said. Being there. That's why we have an oneg like we have every week, because it's important for people to be able to fellowship with one another. Think about so many churches you could go to. You go to church or in and out in 45 minutes. They don't even have a place to eat, or a place to fellowship like that. Nope, just let's come and do the worship and get out of here. But we made a big point. We bought this building. The first thing we did after we bought it, we raised more money so we could blow out the walls and make a bigger oneg space. In the old days, we had a tiny little sliver of a room. I don't know how many of you were here back then. None of you, huh? I mean, it was tiny. It was this tiny little space. Maybe 30 chairs could fit in it, maybe. We blew out the walls in the sanctuary to make more room in there. And we didn't have the money for it either. We had to raise that. So this is also part of what we must do. Okay, and then he says to prayer, we'll be discussing prayer as a discipline. And then what I want us to see is when they did these disciplines. Now this is sort of a summary. We're going to break it down a little further. Of these disciplines, I want you to see what the results were in verses 43 and following in this portion. So it says, everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles. I'm going to tell you something. The reason why we don't have more signs and wonders here is we don't have more students. We don't have more disciples. We have believers, but we don't have disciples. Okay? Because according to this, they were continually devoting themselves to the apostle teaching and fellowship, to breaking bread and prayer. There's this continual devotion to these things, followed by signs and wonders. Not signs and wonders and then. No. These things first, and then the signs and the wonders follow. We got it backwards. We keep wanting stuff to happen, and I want stuff to happen all the time. I pray for things to happen every day. But I'm telling you what the scripture is telling me. We do these things, and then the signs and wonders will follow. Yeah, and it says, and all those who believe and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. Now we're not all going to throw our finances into one big pot and live off each other or anything. We're not we live in a different social and economic system than that. But hopefully everybody's generous with their tithes so that we can continue this. And it says, and they began selling the property and all that and sharing as anyone might have. I'd like to just tell you that this takes a certain kind of devotion, right? These are a certain kind of commitment that these people had to one another and to the kingdom. See, they had thrown their lot in with the kingdom of God. That's where their lives exist. They were all in. They threw all their chips in the middle of the table. Now, I'm not expecting all of us to do that, but I am expecting us to be all in the kingdom in other senses. Although a financial, being willing to support the work is also very important. Without it, we don't have a community. So that's got to happen. And so, but you could see that they were all in, right? And then it says, day by day, they were continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. They were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God, and here, having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. All as a result of that first sentence back in 42. Continually devoting themselves to the teaching and to fellowship, to breaking of bread and prayer. To these things that solidify the community and give them the power to have this kind of influence on the rest of the world around them. And I want you to think about how these people changed the world. They changed the world of their day. I mean, they overcame the Roman Empire, which couldn't be overcome by anything. And that's the power of that of that discipline. When you have people, when you're devoted to all of these things, and that's what we need to do. To devoting ourselves to these disciplines, devoting ourselves to the study of God's word and the other. Okay. All right. So we got an early start. We might get an early finish here, unless there are some questions. Maybe we can have a couple of minutes of discussion. What some of your thoughts about this? Do you think this is a necessary thing? Not just because I'm telling you it's necessary, but is it necessary for your life, and why?
Yes.
Very necessary.
Mhm.
Definitely. It's just to seek deeper within ourselves in relation to His Word and want to really know His Word and have it manifest within us, that we become more doers of the Word, not
Mhm.
just verbal.
To be able to have the influence of God coming out of you to other people is going to draw those people to something that they don't have,
Mhm.
right? And they do get drawn to that.
Mhm.
And then you can have discussions with people, like on a compassionate level, with them. And it does. You see a difference in them when that happens.
You see,
So it's all about furthering the kingdom, but being.
See, what I want us
doing
to
it
be
now.
able to explore is, I always think that there is a biblical. I'm very concerned with ethics these days. Maybe it's what's going on in our political life in this country and so on. But how does one understand ethics and what is demanded of us? And what I want us to do is by actually immersing ourselves in the sort of the disciplines of Yeshua's life. Because remember this quote here that I gave you earlier. The secret involves living as he lived in the entirety of his life. So understanding life and all of life from the point of view of the Messiah. What did he do that made him so spiritually strong? Did he just have the advantage of the fact that he's the Son of God? This is so often what we want to think about. But in order for us to understand the analogy, I want you to go back to the story of the Turkey Prince.
In
Okay,
the other book.
it's in the under the table book.
Yeah, don't have
Okay.
it yet.
Well, you'll maybe I'll print it out for everybody. I have a hard time getting it. But the story of the Turkey Prince, remember, is that this young prince, the king's son, is under the table, living under the table instead of at his father's table. Right? He thinks this is the world, this structure under the table. There's this table there, and the legs are coming down, and human legs are all around him, and food scraps get thrown on the floor, and he eats. And this is his whole life. When that is obviously not the life that his father wants him to live. But what does the father do? The father sends the wise man, who lives in the father's world. And what does he do? He goes underneath the table and he takes off all of his clothes. So he's like the Turkey Prince. He makes himself into a turkey in order to guide the young prince back to his father's table. Well, the same thing is true of the Messiah.
Yeah.
The Messiah came into our turkey world and became a turkey.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't necessarily have the advantage, except that he knows what the Father's house is like. And he knows how to get up. So what he's doing is he's teaching the turkey You could put a shirt on, you could put pants on, you don't have to eat this, you can eat real food, whatever, as the story goes on. Well, if that's true, then it's Yeshua whose life will guide us to how we can put our shirt on, and we can put our pants on, and so on, and rise up from the table, rise up from under the table to sit at the hand of the Father, like God wants us to. But that means that we have to learn how to live our life in the totality of Yeshua's life. And this, whenever I fret about politics or anything, I always believe that if we made more people who are like Yeshua, or really like Yeshua, our politics would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not working right now, but it would be fine if we taught people how to be like Messiah Yeshua and have the appropriate ethics, they have the appropriate approach, know what to say and what not to say, and we would all, and I think the world would be better for it, and that's what we have to strive for. That's what we're going to learn about Messiah's life.
That was one of my hopes. Is I got this book and started reading it, and whatever image I have of myself as a daughter of the Lord, that's not of Him, and learning more and how to be like Yeshua, to be more pleasing to the Father.
Yep. Okay. Good. So any other comments, any other questions before we go on?
I think that this book is could be a blessing to somebody. I was thinking I might even try to get a copy to somebody I know who's looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Well, yeah, they relate with this.
they would like to.
It's from the Orthodox world.
Yeah.
This book. Again, he comes at it from what the Jewish people do with their devotions, largely, is that they make it into like a fact, like a deed. In other words, you see what he said. See what going back. We'll end here with Heschel's quote. He says that unless he says the days of the week, the food that we eat, the holidays of the year, the deeds that we do, these are the frontiers of faith. Unless the outer life expresses the inner world, piety stagnates and intention decays. So the days of the week. We observe the days of the week. For Jews, Shabbat is a very important thing. It's not just the day you go to church. There's more to it than that. You said something about the food. Just thinking about the food that we eat. Most people don't think about the food that they eat. They just shove whatever they want in their mouth. But if we think about the food that we eat, it becomes a discipline. That's what kashrut is not about, like keeping, eating healthy. Jews invented gout. We invented the heart attack. So, it's not about that, but it is about, we don't eat these things because, listen, think about the first sin ever committed. What was the first sin ever committed? What you shoved in your mouth the wrong time.
Really? From the wrong tree.
They ate from the wrong tree. They ate something.
Right.
I mean, you see, here's what goes on in the mind of the average person. The first sin, they disobeyed God. Yes. But what did they do? They ate something. They ate something. So think about, who says that we have the right to put whatever we want in our mouth? God is the maker of all things. He decides. That's why, when we talk about kashrut, when you read the laws of kosher in the Bible, they're called chuchot. That's the name of it. Not mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. Not mishpat. It's chucha. A chucha, a chok, is a commandment that makes no normal sense. That we cannot really explain why. What's the difference between eating this animal and this animal?
Oh, but
I
God
just
says,
get excited
this is unclean.
listening to you.
This is clean. It's simple.
Yeah, but clean and unclean. Who made that distinction? God.
man.
God. Yeah, but we don't know why.
He separates.
You don't know why. Yeah, but explain to me why God decided this.
I can explain it. It's simple. Because God created the universe and created an order according to His word. And everything in the universe was created by vibrations. Everything, all our bodies, vibrations.
Vibrations. So you and I have to have another discussion.
Every cell in your body have all vibrations. And God created everything environment for people.
So you
the order, creative order.
Okay.
Kashrut is the part of the creative order.
Yeah, I agree with that. That part I agree with that. I mean, I'm a more string theory guy, but the point being is that you and I don't fully understand why God, makes certain kinds of distinctions that we, and that's why the rabbis call that a chok. A chok is a command for which we don't, some of the things like you shall not kill. Come on, everybody understands that one. Nobody wants to be killed by anybody, and you don't do any harm to somebody else. You don't steal. We all understand those commands quite easily. But okay, you can eat a grasshopper, but you can't eat pork.
Right.
I mean, I can eat a bug, but I can't eat. I can't have bacon. I mean, that seems unfair. I mean,
Grasshopper eat the grass.
Well, again, I understand.
You're really careful.
So you
says wherever it's grass, it's clean.
Okay. So and that's a very good rabbinical explanation, by the way. Thank you. So that's the way a rabbi would think.
Striped bass or shellfish.
But the point being is that when we eat, if we see eating as another aspect of our devotion to God, rather than seeing it as constraint and restriction and that kind of thing, we see it as part of our devotion to God. And that every time I put something in my mouth, I think about it. And that God provided this thing.
Cleanliness to keep us from trichinosis and hepatitis.
But today you don't have to worry about that with pork. I mean, pork is probably cleaner than chicken.
Yeah.
So what you get the point. The point is that it's a part of our spiritual life. The same thing is true with the other things that he mentions, like the holidays and the deeds that we do, the hallowing of things. The idea of the mitzvot, and we'll get to this when we do it, is that making all things, everything, the most mundane act, into something holy. Mm-hmm. And by the more that we do in that way of making other things holy, makes the world holier. Mm. And maybe one day we can fill the world with God's holiness. That's the objective. So, all right. Next week.
Bring it to Phil in.
Next time I'll bring it to Phil so she can see what it is.
Yeah. Our assignment for next week?
So the assignment for next week, as far as the reading is concerned, I can give that to you right now. But you'll all get, all of y'all with email will get a notification on this. So we're going to be jumping ahead because we're going to be focusing on study as a discipline. So I would ask you to continue to read like chapter 2 a week if you can in each of the books. But particularly, I want you to look at pages 176 to 177 in Willard, and in the Willard book. Just
page
that.
170 what?
176 and 177 through 177 in the Willard book. But I would ask you to read a chapter in each book further.
Are you doing this on the internet?
I'm also we're going to be loading these onto YouTube. So you can look at you go to our congregation's YouTube site, and we'll have them downloaded there under the title of Spiritual Disciplines.
Because I was thinking I would two young women that couldn't be here
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, I told them that they'll be able to do that, and I sent
That
them
they
the
could go on
notes.
YouTube.
Yeah, I did.
Oh,
I
good.
mentioned that. So hopefully I'll get that loaded up by Monday or Tuesday or something. All right, guys, first class down.
Thank you.
Next week we'll be doing study, and we'll be looking at Torah study as a discipline, and hopefully I'll be able to help you do better. Do a better job of your own study. Practical methodology.
The under the table book, I'm going to be getting that probably between the 8th and the 14th, they said.
Yeah.
So what do you want me to look at in that book?
Well, under the table approaches these things less systematically than the Spirit of Disciplines does most of the time. So I want you to just read chapter 2.
Okay.
Let me see. Chapter 2. Let me see. Chapter 2 is. I may want you to go further. Hold on a second. Yeah, read through page 44 if you can. They're all
Read up
adults. Yeah, yeah.
Up to page 4.
Page 44 in the under the table book.
Okay.
All right.
Because I'm not going to get that till like another week from now.
And then
And you're going to see if you can order some.
I'll see what I can. Yeah.
And 177 and 170.
Yeah, that's what we're going to be. We're going to be looking very
176.
specifically at that.
Okay, that's fine. I got it.
Okay, so let's just have a word of prayer and then we'll dismiss. So, friends, Lord, we can just stop the recording.